Hello, happy Halloween. Today is October 26th, 2020, and I am proud to say that after this week is the release of my fourth book in my main series, The Guardian of Light. I cannot begin to tell you how excited I am. And if you stay tuned till the end of this episode, I have a very special announcement. So, as a final treat for this month, to get you all ready for Halloween, I would like you to sit back, relax, and enjoy this first chapter of The Legal Murderer.
The Legal Murderer, written by Shaun Connaughton, narrated by Brad Letson. Chapter 1. A man walked into a crowded bar. The air smelled of years of cigarette smoke built up in the walls, and the man would have found it repulsive if he had not suddenly begun smoking himself. Some crappy new pop song was playing in the digital jukebox that was fixed to the wall. The man was wearing a rundown suit and a long trench coat, which was frayed along the edges. There were even a few spots where it had minor tears. The man's knuckles were bruised, black and blue. There were at least a dozen different groups of people having fun and living up the night, as the man referred to it. He walked over to the bar and sat in the only open chair. He had been coming in almost every other night. A very tall, slightly chubby man wearing a black polo shirt and apron walked over to the man from behind the other side of the counter. "Scott, you're normal?" the bartender asked him. "Yes, please. Thanks, Jordan," he replied. The bartender reached under the bar and filled a glass with whiskey. As he handed the glass of whiskey to his newest patron, a fairly young woman in her mid-20s approached and asked the bartender for another 2 pitchers of beer for her table. She handed him some money and was just about to leave when she watched the guy next to her take a drink from his glass. A look of puzzlement was quickly replaced with a look of shock and enlightenment. "Hey, I know you!" Scott set his glass down and looked the woman up and down. "I'm pretty sure you don't." Yeah, I do. You're the cop guy. You caught the mass murderer that was going around killing all those people," she told him. "Yeah, guess that's me. Of course, I think the right term is serial killer," he told her as he took another drink. "Didn't he get off on some kind of legal thing?" "Look, you seem nice, but I really can't discuss that. I'm very sorry," he lied. "Oh, right. Of course. Sorry. Well, I should get back to my friends." She darted off to get back to her table as another new song began playing through the speakers. Her words rang in his mind as he nursed the cool, spicy golden liquid. "Didn't he get off on some legal thing?" he mimicked softly. Of course, he did not have to lie because now that the case was over with, he could have talked about the case all he wanted. However, after everything he had gone through, he did not want to discuss it with a total stranger. In part because for him, the case was still not over. Not until the smart-ass bastard had paid. Scott sat there and recalled the event, which started 3 years of hell, into his mind. He had done this almost every day for the past 3 weeks. Scott pulled up to a small house in an old neighborhood like any other. The red and blue flashing of police vehicles was incredibly bright in the early morning light. Someone had left him a spot to park right near the front door. There was a feeling he had as he got out of his car and walked to the front of the house. As Scott entered, he flashed his Seattle detective's badge to the officers standing by the door. They let him through. As he walked in, the sight of the living room was horrific. The coroner was taking several good pictures of the woman's body laying in the center of the room. Other officers were also going around, photographing the house and all the evidence they thought might be relevant. As the detective moved closer to the body, he noticed the woman was probably in her mid-30s somewhere. Her cell phone was in her dead hand, and he spotted a pair of rings on the ring finger. "Detective Grimes, I was the first officer on the scene. a young uniformed officer said as he approached him. "Call me Scott. What happened?" "Well, I arrived and the door was closed but unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry. I called in backup and tried several times to announce we were here. I knocked, rang the doorbell, and even tapped on the window. Nothing. Once the other officers arrived, I, along with them, then checked the front door, which was closed. It, as I said, was unlocked, so we did not have to break in." Scott looked at the officer's hand and saw he was wearing a pair of black disposable gloves. This look did not go unnoticed by the officer. "Yes, sir, I did put the gloves on before I touched the doorknob. So, once we made entry into the house, my partner and I carefully went room to room, but it turns out the house is empty," the officer told Scott. He gazed around the living room. Aside from the dead body in the center of the floor, laying in a pool of blood, the room had several other signs. There was a large, rounded crack in the drywall. There were a few other spots that maybe showed signs of a struggle. There also was bits of broken glass from china figurines, which must have been on the nearby shelf, which was also destroyed. "Has anyone called in to have her husband notified yet?" "How did you know she was married?" the young officer asked. Grimes loved getting questions like this. It was a chance to show a newbie a trick or two. However, in this case, it was quite obvious. "She's wearing an engagement and wedding ring. Also, there are at least 3 family photos in this room. 2 have been knocked off the wall, and the 3rd is over by the door to the kitchen." Scott shined his powerful little LED pocket flashlight to point this out to the officer. "Oh, yeah. Well, I was just about to call it in and put out an APB to track the husband down." "Tell them to be discreet and not to tell him what's going on until we have him in interrogation," Grimes quickly ordered the officer, who left the room to call in the alert. The coroner, who was now fingerprinting the dead body, heard everything Grimes had told the officer. "All right, Fred, what do we have? Best guesses and facts," Scott began. "Well, it is pretty bad. We found several cuts and scrapes, as well as several spots where the victim more than likely suffered broken bones, or at least several fractures. There is also a patch of missing hair from the back here. Thing is, we found the clump of hair on the floor. Basically, she was beaten nearly to death. Good call bringing in the husband. This, from what I can tell, is clearly a crime of hatred, and I hope they fry the son of a bitch who did this to her." "Well, as you may know, we don't have the DP in this state," Scott told him in a reminding tone. "Well, when I see shit like this, maybe the state should change that." "I couldn't agree more. But anyways, if you had to say who did this, it had to be the husband, right?" Grimes stood up with the coroner. "Yeah, sure seems that way. But let me go check around just in case," Grimes said, as he began to carefully walk through the crime scene so as to not disturb any possible evidence. "Oh yeah, by the way, Detective Grimes, it was not the beating that killed her." This piqued his interest. He turned to face Fred. "Really?" he asked. "She was beaten badly, yes, but someone stabbed her at least 10 times. He quickly looked around, yet saw no markings indicating anyone had found a murder weapon. "Thank you." Fred returned to what it was he had been doing. Scott walked over and stood in the furthest corner of the room and took a look at the crime scene from a distance. He tried to visualize it all in his head. He had taken a second to burn the woman's face into his mind from one of the broken pictures he had seen on the floor. However, as he stood there, he could picture her being thrown against the wall, being punched, maybe kicked, thrown around like a rag doll, trying to fight off her attacker, her husband, to no avail. He finally can't take it, and he stabs her to shut her up. Why were they fighting in the early hours of the morning? Did she discover a secret about her husband? Money or cheating? She was a fairly attractive woman. Perhaps he caught her sneaking in late. Either way, he kills her, then quickly sneaks into the kids' bedroom and takes them out of the house. Perhaps to see if they could outrun the law before the body was discovered. Clinging to life, she uses the very last of everything she has and dials 911, only to die before the call is answered. Unable to look upon the grisly scene any longer, he decided to step into some of the other rooms and see maybe if there was anything else he could find. He started by walking through the swinging door into the kitchen. The room was a large kitchen-dining room combo. There were signs and a distinct smell into the air that someone had cooked a very nice meal several hours ago. He walked over to the fridge and saw a large, rounded gray plastic garbage bin there. Using the tip of his flashlight pen, he peeked in and saw the garbage sitting on the top. There was a meat wrapper from some steaks, a small wrapper from some corn on the cob, and an empty bag of tater tots. On the small corner wooden table, there was a single wine glass, half full of wine, next to a nearly empty wine bottle and a bottle of steak sauce. This room told a different story than the living room. Someone, probably the victim, cooked a quaint little romantic meal for two and entertained her attacker. Then he got a sudden idea. He dashed over to the sink, only to be disappointed. Both sides of the sink were empty. Sitting in the drying rack was a pair of steak knives, a pair of forks, two small glasses, which they must have used for dipping cups. There were two small plates, two normal-sized plates, and a single wine glass. Something told Scott if they tested and dusted the glass on the table, it would have prints from the victim. The killer had left no trace in this room, and something was not adding up. He checked around the rest of the house and found nothing in the kids' room. While it was not completely clean, they were not trashed and the beds were made. So clearly they had not been abducted in the middle of the night like he had first thought. The bathroom was generally clean. Finally, in the master bedroom, it was probably the cleanest room in the house. The bed was very tidy and the floor was clear and clean. It probably had not been vacuumed in some time, at least a week or so. The room did not appear to have been ransacked at all. There was nothing, at least nothing helpful to the case. Scott motioned for the bartender to bring him another shot as he downed the last few droplets into his mouth. The bartender walked over and set another large, round shot glass in front of Scott and took the empty glass over to the gray plastic dish tub and set it carefully inside. The tub was the same gray as the garbage bin in that house. A new song began playing as some guys in the back of the bar sent out a loud crack sound which indicated they had begun a new game of pool. Several hours later, he had returned to the station and was told by his boss that he would be partnering up with another detective on this murder case. He met with his new partner, a man named Donald Nash. He was almost as old as Scott, perhaps a year or two younger. "Well, Grimes, it is good to be working with you on this case. So, what have we got so far?" Nash asked in his deep, rough voice, which Scott probably figured made him a hit with the ladies. It was well known that Detective Nash was single and that he was kind of the playboy type. Scott had heard snippets of female conversations about them being interested in him. Luckily, for Nash's sake, he had the good sense to never date another officer. The number of conquests he had outside of the precinct was probably very high. Aside from a deep voice, he also had a charming smile and a thick mustache. His brown hair had slight hints of gray in it. Well, the victim's name was Maria Elizabeth Green. She was 28 years of age, and she and her husband had 2 children. The husband's name is Nicholas Green, and he is 29. Their children's names are Myra and Justin. Maria and Nicholas were high school sweethearts. She gave birth to Justin 7 years ago, and Myra 5 years ago. The victim was stabbed 10 times after she was harshly beaten repeatedly by a person still unknown, Scott continued as he read some of the reports inside. She suffered at least 6 broken bones and 2 bone fractures. She was not raped, so there is that at least. They checked under her fingernails and found nothing of interest. There was something found in the toxicology report. It shows there was a muscle relaxant found in her bloodstream. The note here says that the killer gave her just enough to make her limp, but conscious. There was no needle recovered at the crime scene. We did recover a murder weapon. A bloody kitchen knife was found a mile from the house. Some woman walked out to check the mail and to see what was going on down her street. Wait, so the killer walked down the street and placed the knife on the doorstep a mile down the road? That's what the report says. Apparently, the woman is pandering for 24-hour police protection. The victim's husband is in interrogation room 1. I was just about to go in and interrogate him. You think he killed his wife? Don asked. At first I did. The evidence of the crime scene supported that theory. However, the husband had a solid alibi, which is, he and their kids were visiting his parents for the week. After the local sheriff and police were able to track down his current location, we sent a few officers to pick him up. While they drove him here to be questioned, the other officers asked the parents how long they had been there, and they confirmed that they arrived 3 days before and were spending the whole week there. Why wasn't the wife with them? Nash asked. Not sure yet until we speak to her husband. But that's the question we need an answer to, he said as he closed the folder. Well, let's go then. Scott and Donald headed through the halls and down to the interrogation room marked Interrogation Room 1. They entered the room and saw a man wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans sitting on one side, his face buried in his hands. It took the man a second to notice someone had entered the small room, which was filled with a steel table that was probably bolted to the floor. There were 4 chairs and a recording camera in each corner of the room. Hello, Mr. Green. I am Detective Scott Grimes, and this is Detective Nash. He could see the man was still in shock and doing all he could not to cry anymore in front of the officers. His eyes were glowing bright red in the dim light of the room. Am I a suspect? He said, tripping slightly on the last word. No, Mr. Green, Nash assured him as he sat across from him. Scott, too, sat down and placed the file in front of him. However, we need to talk with you and get as many facts from you as we can if we're going to have any chance at catching the sick bastard that did this to your wife. The man nodded in understanding. Scott knew showing his equal anger would build trust with Mr. Green and open him up. So, Mr. Green, I guess the obvious first question we have for you is, why were you and your kids out of town without your wife? Well, my wife said I should take the kids to my parents' house for the week since they were going to be going back to school in a few weeks. I told her we should go as a family, but she insisted she couldn't take time off from her job, so we went without her. If we'd been there, this might not... Mr. Green began to sob again. Mr. Green, please calm down. I know this is hard on you, but we have some ideas. We need to get through this as quick as possible, Nash told the sobbing man as he placed some tissues on the table. He nodded as he took a tissue. Did your wife have any enemies you might know of? Scott asked. What? You know, someone that maybe she saw daily, a purvey customer that she maybe complained about, or a coworker that was always at odds with her? Any possible stalkers blowing up her cell phone, or constantly calling your house? Basically, anyone she might have mentioned that might be after her? Scott asked. No, nothing like that. Damn, another dead end, Nash said as he leaned back in his chair. What are you talking about? Mr. Green asked the officers. We were just hoping if it was someone she was concerned about or someone she knew, this case might have been easier to solve, Scott explained. She never mentioned anything, and I'm sure if she was concerned she would have told me, so I would be prepared in case anything ever happened. She was kind of a scaredy cat that way. Suddenly, Scott was not sure why it came up or what inspired him to ask the next question. Mr. Green, what is your wife's favorite meal? What? What does that have to do with anything? Please, indulge me, Scott told him. She liked a thick, juicy steak served with corn on the cob and tater tots, Scott finished for Mr. Green. Yes, how did you know? And she loves red wine with it? No, she does like red wine, but she has a thing about never drinking alone. Okay, so Mr. Green, I need to tell you all we think we have and know regarding this case. Maybe you will be able to help us fill in the missing pieces. So, according to your wife's coworkers, she seemed very happy from what they said to the officers that questioned them. She left work saying she had to get to the store. We, or more I, believe she knew the person, invited them inside your home. She cooked or was cooking the meal when this person showed up. They ate the meal, then moved to the living room where I can only guess the person, most likely a man, made a move on her. They probably had tried to drug her so she couldn't fight back. When she persisted to stop them and continually refused, the person became violent and killed her. My God, was she Mr. Green gasped and almost began to cry. No, not from what we could tell by the first glance. Once we have the full autopsy report, we will know more. However, if you don't mind me continuing on, I think after beating her nearly to death, he went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, came back and tried to make it appear as if it was a domestic struggle between you and her. This, of course, is how it looked at first glance, since it did not look like a sexual attack. She was fully dressed, and the only tears in her clothes were where the knife stabbed her. I think after that, the killer went back into the kitchen and washed every dish he touched, except for her glass. Still not sure why. Then he returned to the living room and took the knife so we hopefully wouldn't find it. Yeah, but then he got lazy and tossed it out his window at a stranger's house, Nash added. I don't think it was completely random. I think it was to try to throw us off. Maybe so. Mr. Green, is there anything you can think of that might help us out? Nash asked him. She was spending more, he told the officers. Spending more? On what? Scott asked. I noticed every day or so she was withdrawing or spending small amounts of extra money. Would you be willing to allow us to access your bank accounts? Yes, anything. Anything that will help, Mr. Green said to them. Scott and Nash both stood up, and just as they were about to leave the room, Mr. Green stopped them. What do I do now? Mr. Green, I am sorry for your loss, and I know this is going to be very hard on you. I will have an officer escort you back to your children. I would like you to sign some papers that will help us cut through some red tape in this case. You should come back in a few days and check in with us. I would recommend you stay in a motel or with a friend. You really do not want to return home right now. If you or your family need anything from your house, bring us a list, and I will have officers retrieve those items for you, Scott told him. Thank you, Detective. Scott finished off another glass before he stood up, paid the bartender, and decided it was time to leave. As he exited the loud bar and stepped outside, he ran into a familiar face. It was the woman that had spoken to him when he first sat at the bar. Oh, hello. Leaving? She asked. Yeah, I kind of have a long night ahead of me. She could tell there was something weighing on his mind. Look, you don't look good. I'm not asking you to go home with me, but you look like you need to talk about something. So, let's take a walk and you can tell me what's on your mind. Scott considered it and felt around in his pocket. He pulled out a half a pack of smokes and a golden Zippo lighter. He took out a cigarette and offered one to the girl. Oh, no thank you. I vape, not smoke, she answered. She reached out her hand, and he lit the tip of his cigarette and took her hand. The bar sat on a hillside road, which overlooked a medium residential community. The hill had several trees, which made the bright full moon night somewhat enchanting. They walked, enjoying the quiet of nature. Finally, Scott began with what he knew she wanted to hear.
Oh man, that was so good. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you pick up the audiobook on Audible or iTunes, you can find out how that story ends. Let me tell you, as somebody who's heard the whole thing, the more it goes on, the more it starts to really sound like a Stephen King novel. I don't know, I must have been channeling him when I wrote, and the way Brad does the audio, oh man, it's really good. If you'd like to pick up your copy, like I said, this is going to be available soon on Audible and iTunes. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this first chapter. Now, Brad, you had something you wanted to say before you go, right?
Looking for something to pass the time? Need something good to read or listen to? Well, check out these short stories by the wonderful self-published author Shaun Connaughton and narrated by me, Brad Letson. Every October, Shaun will release a new short story to get you ready for Halloween. Do you enjoy audiobooks or eBooks and want something epic to get you ready for Christmas? Then check out his amazing paperback series on Amazon, The Guardian of Light. It is an epic saga which will make any reader feel young again. This adult fantasy series was inspired by the words of J.K. Rowling, Stephen King, and H.P. Lovecraft. Now, Shaun is very hush-hush on this, but what we can tell you is it has fairies, goblins, toys, love, adventure, trolls, magic, thrills, elves, elementals, chills, the Illuminati, magic, gods, Atlantis, wizards, a snowman, dwarves, and even oops, can't say that. But seriously, check it out. This is a fantasy series that takes place in our world today and reinvents Christmas as we know it. So what are you waiting for? Head over to audible.com now and check out The Witch's Hole. And if you like it, go to amazon.com and check out his paperback series, The Guardian of Light.
Well, thank you, Brad, for not spoiling everything. Yes, The Guardian of Light is my main series, and I am trying to be hush-hush about it. Information has slipped out here and there. I really hope if you enjoy this first chapter that you've heard and you would like to check out more of my work, I have the first chapter for another short story I wrote called The Witch's Hole, also available on this channel. In addition to that, I also have the very first chapter of the first book of The Guardian of Light available as well. I told you at the beginning of this video that I was going to have a special announcement. So, here's my special announcement. Next Monday, November 2nd, I will post a video which will not only mark the week of release for my book, but will also be the start of a free giveaway I'm going to do on Amazon for ebook readers, where I will give away the first 2 books in my book series, The Guardian of Light. That's 2 free books for you to go pick up and check out. And if you enjoy it, you can pick up the next 2. So don't miss out on that. In addition to that, I will be posting an extra video on Wednesday and my scheduled normal video for Friday. And I may do a live stream on Thursday, November 5th, which will be a Q&A. Details for that will come this Friday on my last video of this month. So, subscribe. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and remember, Happy Halloween.